In the beginning, Scott Pilgrim was dating a high schooler. Then he met a girl by the name of Ramona Flowers and instantly fell in love with her. While he had to break the heart of his 17-year-old girlfriend, he also had to fight Ramona's 7 evil ex-boyfriends to win her heart. 6 of those boyfriends are down, 1 to go, but Scott Pilgrim is at a crossroads. Ramona is gone. He is on his own. And will he stay alone, or will Scott Pilgrim finally get it together in his finest hour?
6 evil exes, not boyfriends. Just to
6 evil
gotta
exes.
show our Roxy some love there.
She's a little bi-furious.
Hey, thanks for that lovely intro. That was Ben Magnet. We are back for a Fake Nerd Book Club. Hi, Ben.
Hello.
And of course, I'm Sparkz. I'm joined by Ryan Eliopoulos.
Hello, it's also my finest hour.
We are finally closing the book, as it were, on the Scott Pilgrim comic series. We're doing it with Scott Pilgrim, Volume 6, Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour.
So fine.
What I believe in Volume 5, I forgot to mention, but you should know if you've been here, these are all still written by Bryan Lee O'Malley.
Yeah.
The colored editions have colors done by Nathan Fairbairn.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
I did forget to say the credits, but you've been here.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
here we are. We're here for the final volume. I'm so excited to talk about it. This volume is juicy. It's packed. Ooh. It's got so much to it. I love it. It's the thing that I loved the Scott Pilgrim books, but the fact that they end the way they do is what cemented for me that it's one of my favorite things I've read. Ryan.
Hey, it's me.
Brand new. How you feeling?
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. How funny would it be if man, this book sucks. No, it's great. It's everything that we've been ramping up to the end of the book, and I'm sure it was going to have some type of a happy ending. I can only assume in some way, but I get full closure on most of the characters that I want. We have excellent fight scenes, some great emotional resolution, emotional trauma being taken care of therapeutically, if even. And it just continues to be a beautiful book that just always surprises me. And there was one moment again where I was worried about Scott. Scott, this is the final volume. We can't be with him and Kim. I'm we can't. What are we doing here? But even that,
just one moment. Not him.
There's more.
Not him and Knives. No. Not him and Envy.
No, we'll get to that. Yeah. But the stuff with Kim felt the most true, and that could be the ending of the book, him and Kim. But I want him to end it up with Ramona. That's my OTP, my one true pairing. But yeah, Scott makes a lot of fumbles in this book, but I'm glad he eventually remembers everything.
Yeah. Ben, how are your feelings about Scott Pilgrim's final volume?
Oh, it's still fantastic. It is an amazing volume. It ties up almost everything from the previous volumes. Everyone gets a good ending. Everything just gets resolved. Right. Even though I've read this volume quite a few times and rereading it again, you get to a certain point with Kim, with Knives, with Envy, and you just go, Scott, what are you doing? Because even though Ramona's been gone for a while, he's still trying to be he's still kind of sketchy, but also I would say some of it is kind of Wallace's fault too, because Wallace is just go out and get laid, my guy. Just do something.
Yeah.
Because Scott is at home just playing his video game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the way that the book picks up, we're following out of Volume 5. Scott has totally fallen into his routine that he does, where he just video game. What? Oh, I don't think that was that long ago.
That was 4 months ago, bro.
Yeah. Everyone's lives are very clearly taking huge strides forward and more clearly than ever. And this has kind of been the implication of the book all along, is that the people around Scott in his life, Knives aside, because she's a high schooler, have all been progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott doesn't progress at all. And now that is all the more egregious because they're taking even greater strides forward, and Scott continues to remain Scott.
It feels like almost any progress he did make now is gone again, and he's just straight back to -1.
Scott Pilgrim -1.
Scott Pilgrim -1.
Less nuclear detonations.
Yeah. You got importantly Wallace and Steven at the beginning of the book are the two people showing up at Scott's place, because we know Scott has a place now, and they're both coming over there trying to be like, you know, Wallace like, hey, my guy, like fight him or sleep with him. You gotta take care of the Gideon shit.
Yeah.
Or just go have sex with whoever.
Go sleep with Gideon.
Go do whatever you're gonna do. Which has the important line where he's like, go sleep with women. And he's like, I've just never been good at that stuff, the sleeping around stuff. And it's like, Scott.
That is a
Scott, my guy.
Yeah.
My guy, you lie. You lie.
I love that Wallace is like, yo, let's go to Hooters.
Yeah.
And like, that's your favorite place. Like, no, Wallace doesn't like Hooters. He's trying to get you some friends. Some lady friends.
Wallace is trying in his very own way, and he's like, come on, guy, you'll get good at it. It just takes practice. And you go on to...
Also, again, it's probably maybe not the best advice for Scott Pilgrim specifically.
It's very much of like, how does Wallace move on from something? And he's just trying to give his like, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And like for Wallace, that works because Wallace is a far more self-confident being than Scott.
Yeah.
100%.
And then you got Steven, who's like, hey man, like, you know, come back to your job. And he's like, well, what about the band? And he's like, Scott, you're not in the band. He's like, I don't play bass. And he's like, Scott, you broke your bass like 4 months ago. And he's like, I don't think that was 4 months ago.
Is this the same time that he learns that there's a new band, or is that later?
Yes, this is where he learns that he's not in the band. Scott's so disillusioned from the reality of what's happening to him. It's sad. It's super depressing. We've all been through bad breakups, but Scott is Scott, so it's like way worse. Any other thoughts on that particular time period before we move into Scott's first nightmare?
No, it's just unfortunate because like this being the final volume, like I was thinking we would get a happy ending at some time, but like this book starts pretty rough for Scott.
Yeah,
and I'm like, man, what is it gonna take for you to get out of this? Because like if anything, like you're the worst you've ever been, because like you had something really great and it's gone now. So it's like, will he ever get out of this? I figure he will, but how long will it be? And the nightmares start happening, which is awful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites is Romano coming in and spearing Scott to the ground with the power of love.
Yeah.
Which we know canonically is the power of love.
She's like a Valkyrie.
And as he's there, he gets feasted on by a bunch of demons who we learn are very clearly the visages of Kim, Knives, and Envy.
Yep.
Eating at his limbs. And that's what motivates Scott to like, I think I need to get out of the house.
Yeah, so he goes to, is it a bar that he goes to or a club? He goes to a club, right? It's like a different club. It's not Gideon's. Or is that one Gideon's?
It's not Gideon's.
It's not Gideon's. Okay, it's opening soon.
It's still, the Chaos Theater's coming. It's around the corner.
Yeah, Monique says like, oh yeah, Gideon's club's opening soon or something. And then Scott sees Knives there.
Before that, importantly, he sees Cole, who's the other member of Steven's new band, and he says Cole is a guy with glasses. So Scott's like, "Who the hell is this guy?" And Steven's like, "You thought he was a Gideon and stuck a fork in his head. He plays the drums." He's like, "What? That never happened."
I don't remember that. Like, well,
Scott's such a mess.
Sounds like you, Scott.
Yeah.
But yes, we meet Knives, who is established as 18 years old.
This is probably the grossest thing that Scott's ever done. And he's done a lot of. He was even worse than like fake dating the teenager. The second she turns 18, he's like, "Well, how does it feel? How does it feel to be an adult in the eyes of the law?" Like, Scott, what the fudge, dude?
Sketchy ass 24-year-old.
Yeah, sketchy ass 24-year-old. I'm really glad that the comic directly calls attention to like, this is skeevy.
Yeah,
this is really skeevy, and you should feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and he like yells at her like, "Do you want to have sex? You want to have casual sex?"
That it's not even a question. He says we should have sex.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, yeah, he does. He says you want to have sex. I think we should have casual sex.
We should have sex. Casual sex.
Yeah. While she's like, which is really like, it sucks because he's focusing on, you're not 18, you're 18 years old now. And she's saying about these things about this big change in her life that she's trying to relate to Scott about, that she's about to move away, go to college, all this stuff. And that's all she's saying. And Scott's just like, 18. We can have sex now.
You're the one person I know who wants me.
It is like also that Wallace set him on this path.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bless you.
Wallace set him on this path, so like Scott's like, this is good advice.
He's like focused,
bro. It's so bad, and I love the Bryan Lee O'Malley does such a good job of just the awkward stare
Yeah.
from both of them after he says that out loud, and they're both super uncomfortable.
Yep.
Knives, being the sweetheart that she is, like she still talks to him, and she's like, I don't remember what she says exactly after that, but she's like, maybe we can make out a little bit or whatever.
Yeah. So before that, she's like, Scott's like, I'm sorry, it was Wallace's fault. He gave me bad advice.
Yeah.
And she's saying, Scott, you remember you cheated on me and stuff. Like you
Mhm.
were kind of a crummy boyfriend. And
Yeah.
Scott's just, this is the introduction of one of my favorite things in this book.
Oh, it's reoccurring.
Which is the memory cam.
Yeah.
Which is where Scott's like, I sort of, and his memory of being with Knives is Knives following him in the beautiful sunshine in the memory cam saying, oh my God, Scott, you're so sexy. And he's like, oh, thanks, baby. Like,
Yeah.
It happens like 3 times.
That's how Scott thinks things were.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah.
And she says like, I'll always like love you to some extent, Scott, but I don't want you.
Yeah.
I've moved on.
That's growth, baby.
Yeah.
Which is also where Scott questions if she's like Stephen Stills, because she's been with Stephen Stills a lot, which Kim thinks is hilarious because, as we will learn later, Stephen is very homosexual and not interested in the ladies at all. But that's all way over Scott's head. Everybody else is aware, but Scott.
All that recording with Joseph.
Yeah.
Made him realize.
And it's really great because you have Knives, like we've talked about Knives' arc and what's happened with Knives and how well represented as a teenager she is. And she gets to have this whole thing, which is like, this is exactly this part right here that I'm about to say is exactly why I could not be okay with Knives getting together with Scott.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie, regardless of the age thing.
Yeah.
Which is that she says, I'm happy being alone right now, Scott. I'm trying to learn to like me alone. I mean, I've spent a year of my life on you. A year of my life. And like, that's such an important growth step for her, and it's so wonderful that she has it. And it's like, it would be the antithesis of everything about her getting back together with Scott.
Yeah.
But yes, she does make the decision like, oh no, we can make it out a little. And that's when it was horrible for everyone, and including you.
Yeah. And they're both
I love those little fourth wall breaks. I absolutely adore them. And it's just like that one, just like that part after he and Knives actually kiss for a hot second, and it's like, it was horrible for everyone, and that includes you. It's like, yeah, that was horrible.
And the paneling and the color, like, even before you think about how the narrator is for the film, it has that same feeling where it's like, but it was horrible for everyone, and that includes you.
Yeah, I hear Bill Hader when I read that stuff.
Yeah. I really like that as like an end to
like a button.
Knives and Scott's stuff. That like she expresses how much growth she's experienced. She expresses that like, Scott, you were kind of shitty and I wasted a lot of time on you, and like I'm not bitter about it, but I'm learning to grow from it.
Yeah.
And then also the like, but maybe it'll be okay if we like kind of do a little something, and it's like, oh God, it's not okay at all. It's not okay at all.
Yeah, it's just not the same anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about this book, is that happens with basically every person that Scott deals with. Like they confront Scott about it, and he kind of learns a little bit, and then there's like resolution until we get to the very end where it's like fully complete in a way, and it's like, it's nice. It's nice to see, because like I didn't know what was gonna happen with Knives in this book. Like, I don't know if like she was gonna continue to like Scott, or if she was gonna be like super hateful and try to kill him or something. But like, they have a nice. While it starts disgusting, they have a nice resolution in a way, which is nice.
Yeah. Scott ends up at a party that is for someone named Sarah Jane, and Scott doesn't know her at all. And it's like, dude, this is her party. And he just assumed this was another one of Julie's party.
Yes, he's at some lady's house.
He's just like kind of wandered by the wall into some building where there was a party that he seems to recognize people from. He has no idea why he's there at all.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Julie moved to Montreal, and Scott's like totally missed this because
young
Neil informs him.
And guess who's there?
A woman with a bust, waist, and hips, all at a score rating of 999.
Hell yeah.
Perfect woman. Envy Adams.
Envy Adams.
Yeah.
And of course, just like young Neil's advice is like, yeah, she's here. You should just preemptively go up to her and be a dick for no reason. And of course, Scott goes up. And of course, Scott goes up and is like, Envy Adams party with mere mortals, and just like the hair whip.
Yes.
Just like instantly stare, and Scott going,
Yeah, beautiful
And
art, and he's so off his game. He's so screwed up, but here he is just trying to do something with Envy. So he's all, what are you drinking? Let me buy a cheese. I'm sorry, I.
He turns into.
And then I love the narrator coming in and saying, "We'll spare you the embarrassment of witnessing the rest of this spectacle. Please turn the page."
Which turns into Morty for a second.
Again, the kind of thing I like. Yeah, it's very Morty. Yeah, now that you said that. Yeah, and this is where we start to like peel back that curtain on Envy saying like, Scott, you really weren't all peaches and cream. Like, you want to act like I'm some bad thing, some villainous. We were practically kids when we dated, Scott, and it's not like you were some paragon of virtue. I was such a paragon. I was such a paragon.
His pouty face is just so freaking.
Like a little baby.
Which is like, we've talked about like how Scott has crafted his own narrative of how things happen in his life and this kind of thing. And he really truly has like, I don't think there's anybody who in his eyes he believes he actually is innocent more with than like, I think he feels guilt about Kim. And I think he feels like, even as he suppresses it, guilt about Kim, guilt about Knives, guilt about Lisa and all this stuff. As he ignores it, he feels it. But I think he's truly lied to himself so much that he's like, I was great with Envy, though.
Yeah,
I couldn't have been a better version of myself, and she still cheated on me and broke my heart. Which we're getting from Envy. That's like, all right, like tell yourself you're lying, but that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't think he was the problem at all in this relationship. And like, as we learned with every relationship Scott has ever been in, like, homie, you were just as bad, if not worse, than everyone.
Yeah. Which is one of those things that I really like, and like no other version of the Scott Pilgrim story besides the books has done what I like so much about Envy here, which is like, and we'll touch on it. It comes up again a little bit later in the book, but like Envy getting to call out that like, I'm not just some bad bitch. Like, importantly, we have the moment, I'll just go to it. It's a little further down the book than where we are, but the moment where Envy says, do you even remember the New Year's Eve fight that you started? And she also brings up like, Scott, we dated for 2 years. I can read you like a book. And he's like, 2 years? That doesn't add up to Scott. And she's like, you don't even remember me. You're like the only person who knew me before.
Yeah.
And again, we get the memory cam thing with Scott where
you're such a stud.
He's like, I don't think it was, I think it was pretty good. And it's like, oh my God, Scott, you're such a stud. Yeah, totes, and the memory cam and everything. And she's like, she reveals that like that big fight, the thing that we don't get the full details because we're still living in Scott's perspective.
Yeah.
But that night where she said, just go away, Scott started a fight that we're not seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like, I really like that because it really illustrates like, not that Envy hasn't made bad choices or that she doesn't like do things, but like, she's been so like, she's the bad guy.
Yeah.
And who the heartbreaker, the bad person in the relationship. And this is the only material in the Scott Pilgrim story that ever says, yeah, they were both not great to each other.
Yeah.
And like, even Envy acknowledges like, I wasn't great, but neither was Scott. Like, we were both dumb kids and we both made dumb choices, but like Scott had just as much a hand in being shitty in that relationship as she did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important, and it's really valuable to have that for Envy here. And I lament that it never really shows up anywhere else.
Yeah, I like in that conversation. Sorry, real quick, but I like that in that conversation, Scott's like you actually care, and she's like, of course I care.
Yeah,
like he's making her out to be like an actual supervillain, and but like she's just a person, and he's putting her on this like evil pedestal.
Yeah, and one of the last things she says before she starts building up to the she's working for Gideon thing and revealing Gideon in the street, which is the first time Scott sees him and then immediately has to run away.
Yeah,
is Scott saying, you know what I remember? I remember you breaking my heart.
Mm.
And Envy says the feeling is somewhat mutual.
Yeah,
meaning that Envy also had her heart broken by Scott. Like, and we just don't get that other side of it in the other materials.
Yeah.
Like they don't have the time to give to Envy to offer that. But I think it's important because if you just watch the movie and you just watch the show on Netflix, then like you don't know that Scott was pretty terrible to Envy too.
Yeah. And
that she's more than just like a hard ass bitch.
Yeah.
And that there was a history there that Scott was culpable for.
The other versions, like the movie and show, kind of like they kind of just make Scott King he's kind of just like aloof and like kind of like ditzy. and it's like kind of like a silly guy, but like this is like where the real like emotional baggage is. It's in this book. And again, like those are adaptations that can't get everything in, but like that's why this book is great, because like it really dives into like, yo, Scott is like maybe like the worst out of all of them for how much he just like forgets, doesn't care, is not present, and like he needs more growth than practically everyone else in the book. I mean, it is his book after all. Yeah,
which is one of those things when we go back to volume 3 and we talk about like seeing the build up flashback stuff, Scott's interpretation of his relationship with Envy, and he has things like when he shows up at that New Year's Eve party and he's like, I got my hair cut, and she just says, get out of my life, Scott.
Yeah,
like we know that there's something missing there. Like there's a thing that wasn't said. And that's really important. And she becomes a more full character, and she becomes a more fully fleshed person. And I think Envy is one of my favorites in this ending.
Yeah.
Just because it takes her from one note to a real person, and I feel like we had trouble crossing that line before.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have a part of the story that says like even the things Scott thinks he was the most virtuous at, he wasn't, and that like there is responsibility for two people in a relationship, even the one with Envy, who like everyone wants to make her out to be a huge bitch and the worst thing, and it's like okay, but like Scott still played a hand.
Yeah, and to bring it to that the conversation they have a little bit later that you talked about, when she's like, "You're the only person who knew me before."
Yeah,
and he's before what? And she's like, "Scott, do you remember anything?
Yeah,
ever, like ever?" And it's like, no, he
really doesn't.
He represses his entire any negative thing that ever happened in his life go away. And like, oh, I don't remember it. It didn't happen. I'm the best guy in the world. And it's like, you can only do that for so long, my man, before like it's going to bite you in the ass for real.
And importantly, like what we learn later in the book is that Scott will repress like negative things that hurt him for sure. But the thing he'll repress the most is the negative things he did.
Yes.
And that's the thing he'll bury the deepest. And he did a fair amount with Envy, or he would remember more.
That's true.
So jumping back just a little bit in between these conversations with Envy that Scott has is one of my favorite pages of Gideon the cat finally coming back and crawling over Scott, and he's just like,
yeah,
Giddy. And he's got to cuddle it, and the cat's just like, bro, what?
And he's just like holding on to the cat the whole time when he's asleep, and the cat's just like, okay.
Yeah. So Envy tries to prepare Scott for like Gideon's coming, and he's not even that bad of a guy. She's working for him now. And Gideon appears to Scott on the street, and Scott is scared, and he runs away to hide forever.
Dash.
Yep.
Dashing through the snow.
Which again is great panel work. Which I've thought a lot about this moment, and I think it genuinely was Envy thinking that like she was helping Scott. Like she was about to help Scott find peace with the situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the look on her face when he runs away is so shocked.
Yeah.
Because she was hoping to broker something and Scott couldn't face it. Granted, we know later in the book Envy didn't know how bad Gideon was. But from her mind, I think she was trying to do something nice for Scott.
Yeah.
I really do think that.
Also, remember, the end of the last volume ends with Gideon calling him saying, "So when do you want to die?" And this is the moment that he meets. So I'm like, Scott's like, well, I don't want to die. I got to get out of here.
Right.
I've already punched 7 other people wearing glasses, and it was never Gideon. Now that I confronted him.
Stuck a fork in the head of one of them.
Yeah. Poor guy. At least it wasn't his hand because he's the drummer.
Yeah. And that brings us to chapter 34. I almost never talk about chapters and titles, but I knew I had to highlight this one if Ben Magnet didn't do it himself, because it's chapter 34, A Link to the Past.
I love Metroid.
Which is when Scott goes to visit Kim, and Kim living with their parents.
Oh, before that, where is it? Kim leaves him a really cute message.
Oh yeah.
She's like, "Hey, I saw this guy, and he has a stupid parka like you had since you were 12. That's literally the most interesting that's happened here. It sucks up here. So get over your depression and come visit me, ass clown." And I'm like, she still likes him, at least as much as being a friend and wants to be in his life. But she's being like, life sucks and whatever, but if you want to come visit me, like, I don't care or whatever, that kind of like mentality about it. And I think it's really great. And I think this is one of my favorite parts of the whole book.
Me too.
Not even just because like I was worried about like, are Kim and Scott gonna get together? But like it's just like it's more really great resolution with them and like hanging out in like a tree.
I'm really glad that like it's Kim who's with Scott when he finally faces himself and defeats the Nega Scott. Like, I think that's really, really important.
I remember everything
and valuable. And you get a lot of just great art here because this is a moment, obviously, like people were kind of wondering what was going to happen for all the volumes that leads to Kim and Scott kissing.
See, at this exact moment, but like before I like turn the page, I'm like, I would be happy if Kim and Scott got together because they like.
So would Kim.
Look at
that kiss.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate it. Like I think they're both very interesting. Like Kim's a very kind of like reserved, like funny person, and I think she works well with Scott. But like, I think what happens after is just as impactful and good.
Well, and I think the major thing is that, like, and it doesn't lie about its characters or its world or the story that's happened so far, which is that Scott's saying, like, you know what, I recognize that you're kind of the person who's been the constant in my life, and you're uncomplicated and easy.
Which is also kind of
going back to the easy thing.
Yeah.
Which is why Kim knows this even without him saying it, which is why he's saying, like, you don't love me, Scott. Like you don't love me. Kim does love Scott.
Yes.
And it bothers her that she does, but she does.
Yeah.
But she knows Scott doesn't love her. She knows Scott loves Ramona. And so Kim does the right thing, which is like stand up for both herself, but also to get Scott to be like, hey, recognize that you are on the wrong path, my guy.
Yeah.
You're just trying to escape your pain.
And not only that, we also get one of the things I also love about this book is, especially with volume 2 and all the other stuff where we see from Scott's perspective, you know, he's the hero, he fights the good fight, yada yada yada. Like he was like, we were in and when Kim says, do you remember high school? It's like, yeah, we were in high school, but I had to move. It's like, dude, you told Lisa, you never told me. And then we get this great panel of come on, camera. Like the first top panel is like Scott's memory, but then the second one is what really happened when he was talking to Lisa. And then they mentioned Simon Lee, and Scott even said Simon Lee was the bad guy, and she's like, "Are you kidding? We were dating. She was dating Simon, and he punched a poor kid in the face.
Yeah,
and didn't realize it.
Like 4 volumes later,
Simon.
Yeah, four volumes later, we get the real story.
Yeah, which makes Scott like seem like a real piece of shit. And the thing is, like, I highlighted it as well. Like I took a picture of it because the fact that we see right next to each other the moment of him seeing himself telling Kim he's moving, and then seeing him actually telling Lisa and not having told Kim, who he was dating, that he was moving. Having them next to each other really cements the unreliable narrator you've had this entire time in Scott Pilgrim, and that like you can't just take, even if you saw it in the past, even if you saw the visuals, which Envy has already set us up for with like that we weren't seeing the whole side of the story.
Yeah,
and now you're being told like, nah, legitimately, like some of the things you've seen, that's not true. Like that's just not how it happened.
That's a fake page.
And that's really valuable. Like it really creates the like break between the audience and like, oh, okay, so Scott's like just full blown full of shit sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I really love that. I really love that Bryan Lee O'Malley did that with the character here. And all of that pushes Scott to the point where he goes glowy head himself.
Yep.
And says, you know what, forget I said anything, forget the whole thing, we'll just forget all about it. And Kim recognizes that this is happening, and it's the same thing that's happened to Ramona.
Yeah. And she says, which I think is like the thing that finally like caps it off. It's like, if you keep forgetting your mistakes, you'll just continue to make them.
Yeah.
And then Nega Scott activated.
Everything you've done wrong is just going to keep following you around, Scott.
Yeah.
And Scott sees the Nega Scott, and he goes after him. He says, I just need to kill him so I can forget her and move on, there's really great artwork here between Scott and the Nega Scott going at each other. And the most telling line, the most important line, I think, of all of this is when Scott is confronting the Nega Scott, and says that he needs to kill him. He says, it's better than having to live with myself.
Yep.
In response to Kim saying that you will just keep making your same mistakes. Scott has a deep, deep hatred of himself.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's been pushing him to do this over and over and over again, which means he's been doing this all his life.
Yeah.
Of just saying, like, I can't live with how shitty I've been, and pushing for it. And finally, something actually breaks through and changes Scott. And that thing is Ramona. Yeah. Really great art as he remembers all these different flashes of Ramona, and that she's the thing that he wants. And when he says her name out loud, it makes the Nega Scott stop, shut down, and then burst back inside of Scott.
Reabsorbed.
Yep.
I remember everything.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Scott finally has his full knowledge of himself and his life and everything he did.
He's like Wolverine, who got all his memories back.
Yeah,
Yep.
I really, really like this. This is one of those reasons why, again, like I don't hold the movie fully accountable because I'm sure they did not have all the details of this. But like when you get to this movie story about the biggest Scott, I'm like, yeah, all right,
Yeah.
like fun joke, I get it,
Yeah.
cool. It just has so much more meaning here because it is literally the tool of Scott's own personal self-destruction that he's been doing.
Yeah.
And so Scott finally he gets a little kiss for luck from Kim.
Smack.
Luck. And he's ready to go and actually fight for Ramona and fight Gideon and earn her back. And you get the incredible like Scott Pilgrim is coming home.
Yeah,
it's personal.
Just like the cool anime scene of him on top of the bus with his coat flying in the wind.
Yeah.
Chaos Theater time.
And that takes us to the Chaos Theater and the fight with Gideon. You got him being a piece of shit to Envy, which is implied that they're at least kind of hooking up.
Gideon,
Gideon. But like he's not really interested in her, and it bothers Envy.
She's playing at the Chaos Theater and not Sex Bomb.
Yep,
which is it from the movie.
Yeah.
What I really like about that, and I'll just highlight it here, is because it's Envy who's headlining the Chaos Theater. You get this. I think it would have been cool. It would have been cool if the movie could have done this. I think. Just picture like Brie Larson in the same moment, saying, "I'm going to sing a song for an old friend."
Yes.
And starting the song, and it's like making him aware of where Gideon is, and it's like to encourage him to fight in that same way. That would have been pretty sick, and I think it's a cool come around for Envy.
Yeah,
in the spot she's in.
Gideon, they're definitely hooking up or whatever, because he says, I've had some very promising young designers literally chained to sewing machines for a month, and you know that dressing you up like a doll is fulfilling for me sexually. And I'm like, oh yeah, he is a bad man. Oh no.
Yeah. Gideon's pretty shitty in the movie.
Yeah.
Gideon's his own thing in the show. Gideon is truly disgusting and gross.
Yeah.
Just awful. The worst in this book.
Yeah.
He's the worst thing.
100%.
On the way to get into Envy's song, we got the Chaos Theater looking like it does at the end of the movie. This is where we get my favorite payoff joke about Monique and Sandra, who have been there for the whole time, but have never been next to Julie, where you get the revelation that they're both just like two halves of who Julie is as a character. Because you get Julie P, the original and best, and Sandra, not the original, and Monique, not the best. And once they're all three put together, you're like, oh shit, they're just two fractures of Julie, and they're just both aping Julie's personality.
Yeah, one's got glasses, but the other doesn't. Yeah. It's very much like if the doctor was it bi-generated?
Yes.
And then like this is the outcome, like they get one part of each of them.
Yeah, and this is all Julie and them criticizing Scott, being like, I thought you didn't drink, Scott. And he's like, I drink sometimes, I drink. And that leads to Scott spilling all over himself, making a mess, and doing his best Charlie Brown. Why?
Well, maybe don't try to chug down an entire drink in one shot, bro.
Yeah, which leads to the hilarious Scott having to wear a Chaos Theater Gideon Graves t-shirt through the whole thing. And then you get super duper story important moment where Scott runs into his sister because everybody's at the Chaos Theater, and meets Stacy and sees that she's next to Neil, and he realizes they never met, and he says, so he starts to introduce him. He says, this is young, this is Neil, and Neil is finally no longer young Neil, and this is the greatest day of his life.
He's graduated.
He's Neil.
And just like that, one character's arc closure, it's done. Neil is no longer young Neil.
Nope, he is truly Neil.
So yeah, Envy starts her song and lets through the song informs Scott that Gideon is coming up on him to attack him. And this is where a huge revelation happens for Scott, where he finds out, and I think this is a good twist. Another thing that the movie does it different. I think the movie's good for its own interpretation. But for the book, you find out Gideon doesn't have Ramona.
Yeah.
And Scott thought he did this whole time. And it turns out that you don't have her. And then Gideon really bothered. She isn't with you?
Yeah.
What?
You defeated 6 of her evil exes, and she left you. Scott's like, shut up, it's complicated. Like, God, you're both awful.
Yeah.
Before we go into that, I just want to highlight another moment I thought was really freaking funny.
Yeah,
and it's when Scott's going into the theater after he sees Wallace and the other Scott, and he's zipping off his jacket. He doesn't realize that he walks by Steven Stills and Joseph, and Steven's like, "It's $7, Joseph. I'll hold my coat." And Joseph's all, "Quit acting like a broke ass bitch."
Yeah, that is good. You're right.
I love Joseph so much. I'm so glad he sticks around. I love the Joseph Steven stuff. I think it's just really nice.
Yeah.
As a background piece. So Gideon, Scott, they're in their fight. This is one of many favorite art moments in this book.
Yeah.
Which is when Gideon punches Scott in the chest.
It's like cosmic.
And steals the sword from him. I think is really great.
He tries to pull the maneuver of like, knowing me, you are also now an evil X.
Yeah.
It's aping Empire Strikes Back. Like it's direct dialogue Empire Strikes Back, but instead of we can rule the galaxy, like we can rule Ramona's love life. And he's like, I'll never join you. You're no Luke Skywalker, bro.
Scott doesn't even want to fight Gideon. The secondary characters are making me do it.
Yeah.
Gideon stole the power of love. What a dick.
Yeah, what a dick. It's a really good start to the fight. And I remember the first time I was reading it, that it really threw me on like, I don't know actually how this is going to play out, because I, just like Scott, assumed Romano was with Gideon.
Yeah.
And like at that point, I'm like, what does this mean? Is Gideon lying?
Yeah.
Like, what does this mean?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what was going to happen either.
Yeah. And all of that leads to, all right, Holmes, no hard feelings. And Gideon stabs Scott through the heart. And big blood splatter page.
This is not there's obviously fight scenes, but this is not a violent book. There's way more blood in this last volume than I ever expected. It's gruesome at points. Like Scott gets slashed to death basically in the next fight as well. It's really like, it's impactful. It's the first time you really see blood.
And you get the reactions from everybody as Scott lies dead on the floor. Even Envy is shocked to see it. And he thinks he's dying. Yes, Ben.
No, I was gonna say even Kim is in that those panels too. Like she could feel it in the force.
Yeah, she senses something is wrong. Somehow Scott has died, and that leads to Scott slipping into his usual dream desert subspace, and that's when Ramona reprises her original lines, like, "You're just having some idiotic dream." 36. Don't let it get you down.
Yeah,
I'm so lonely.
Yeah, so Ramona finally shows up and reveals that she just left because she was feeling really messed up and she needed to work through things. And there's this really sweet moment where she's saying, "I got pretty messed up," and Scott's saying, "I got kind of messed up anyway." And then Ramona, "But you're so tough." And Scott's absolute happiness at Ramona thinking he's tough.
I am tough.
And the way she sees him. And I think it's really great because it's Ramona on her own little journey, just like Scott's been, where she's saying, "I came back to say I'm really, really sorry. And I've been a crummy girlfriend and I feel like an idiot." And during all that, Scott is just so happy to see her. And so he starts kissing her and he keeps kissing her because he's just happy she's back.
Oh, and like, so, and he's like, "Wait, so I'm not dead?" It's like, "No, you're dead."
Yeah, she's like, "No, dead. Scott, I lied. You really are dead."
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's okay because he got an extra life.
Yeah.
Which is really great. I love all the art coming back together.
But also this the panel or the page before that, he's just constantly trying to kiss Ramona and she just yells, "Down, boy." He's like, "I don't care. I forgive you. Just let me make out with you."
Down, boy.
Right.
Yep. And he goes, "You're actually dead." He's like, "I'm in heaven. You're an angel." And she's like, no. And then this the extra life. And then the very next page when he breathes and Stacy's all like, "Sorry, Mom, false alarm." And she's like, "I told you Scott got a 1-up in volume 3.
Yeah. No stress for the parents there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bryan Lee O'Malley's just really good at like giving you like little tiny morsel panels of just whole landscape kind of things.
Yeah.
That just give you such an emotional reaction and mood to what he's doing. So yeah, Scott's back. Gideon was not prepared for it. And not only is Scott back, but Ramona comes bursting out of his chest really triumphantly ready to face down
Yes.
Gideon.
Real quick, in that sequence, Ramona also has a moment of self-reflection, and this is the line from the movie. Yes, I've dabbled in being a bitch, but listen, I came back because I'm always the one who leaves. I can never say goodbye. So it's even her like confronting herself in this moment with Scott, like two people who run away from their problems, who are like very similar in a lot of ways, like coming together in the same moment, and like it's really nice.
Yeah, agreed. You get a really weird joke, but I kind of love it, where Ramona comes out, and when she shows up, there's a offhanded comment that Gideon makes that makes people in the background think that she's a dude. And so they're Googling Ramona to see if she's a dude. And then after a moment, those same guys are like, if she's a dude, I'm super gay.
Word. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Gideon starts like transforming his stage, which comes down to reveal how messed up Gideon is, which is that he has all of the ones that got away. They're cryogenically frozen, awaiting the future day when they'll all go out with Gideon because he loves them all. And there are a total of 7 with one empty spot remaining
he's
for Ramona.
He's the worst Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, he's bad.
Yeah,
he's a bad man. He bad man. I appreciate that they give them all names.
Yes.
It's just nice because like these are not going to be relevant characters, but at least it doesn't feel like they have zero identity. So it's Courtney, Riley, Nina, Sloane, Irene, Ginger, and there is still a spot
Spice Girls
for Ramona.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the prodigal son joke. That's what Gideon said. Gideon said the prodigal son returns, which is what gets those two guys going. Is that a dude?
Yeah.
I gotta look into it. This was the part where like the Gideon stuff really changed for me because I'm like, oh god, he's awful. He's the worst.
He maybe deserves.
He's a bad man.
He does deserve to die.
He's a bad man.
Yeah.
The second he brings down like every other of the evil X's, I would say they suck in a way, but at the same time, it's like, they kind of also have a reason because they still really like Ramona and they still want to, or they in some form they still want to kind of be with her.
They're not necessarily evil.
Yeah, they're not necessarily evil. They're just given that label of being evil. Whereas Gideon is the true evil son of a bitch here, especially because he brings out things like, these are all the girls that rejected me, so I kidnapped them and have them cryogenically frozen. It's like, that's messed up.
Yeah. Like in the fight, Gideon's like, she started it. It's all her fault, Scott. Everything. And he's like, shut up, you guy. And Wallace is like, better come back.
Better come back, Scott.
I love Wallace just always interjecting.
Yeah.
He's like the best. He's the absolute best.
Really importantly, something I love about this is that when they start the fight, Gideon facing them, he first started by getting a blast on them that activates their glows.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's in this state where they're getting upset, which pushes Scott back from like having been totally happy to see Ramona to, why am I still fighting this lunatic? I mean, you're the one that left. Maybe you should just go back to wherever the hell you were. And Ramona's saying maybe this was a mistake.
Yeah.
And it's how the glow is affecting them, which I thought was a useful like tool. While I don't think it negates from the importance of the story and the emotional journey that the characters have been on, to highlight that the glow has been something Gideon is putting in that affects them and pushes them towards their worst sides. It's not something they wouldn't say, but it is like bringing out their most negative feelings about the situation rather than allowing them to just be themselves.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really nasty trick.
Yeah, and they both like are glowing at the same time. So like in a way that almost like brings them closer like together, because like they're both being affected by this, and like
one of them can't be as directly hurt because they're not in their normal state. They're both in their pain state.
Yeah.
And so they're both throwing pain around.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Ramona fighting Gideon and saying, maybe they weren't so bad when referring to her exes. They weren't so bad when I was saying that maybe they all turned into assholes later, just like you. And Gideon's trying to say, you're the common denominator, baby. And which is where Ramona triggers him with, why do you even want me back? You spent our whole relationship pushing me away. You didn't want me until I left. And Gideon has his own memory cam, just like Scott. And where she's saying, baby, you light my fire. Are you obsessed or what?
LOL.
And Gideon's like, I what?
Yeah.
And Gideon also, we realize, is just as messed up in his brain hole about what he does as Scott is.
Yeah.
Apparently he also sullied some of Scott's memories too.
Yeah, when he slashes Scott, he's like, "Insulin whore, don't you sully my memories."
What
As he
what is
slashes
it?
him.
Oh, insulin whore. God,
Yeah.
what a line.
He's terrible. And then we get Ramona is ready to just disappear again. She's using the subspace to do it.
Maybe I can't
change, and Scott's saying don't go to try and grab her. And that's when Gideon reveals that she's been riding the glow that he's created to get into subspace, which has been the thing that he's been using to manipulate her mind and her memories. It's how I made my millions, buddy. Emotional warfare seals you inside your head, just you and your issues. And once you're hit, that's it. No cure. It's chronic. And that Ramona, as the brilliant self-hater she is, found a way to turn it to her advantage.
And this is when he stabs Romano.
Yeah, when he
which I did not see.
Yeah,
coming.
that was surprising.
I was like, are they gonna kill Ramona? Like, I didn't think it was gonna happen, but I'm like, yo, man, like, how many times can you get stabbed in the stomach? Like, not everyone can get stabbed in the stomach and survive.
And there's an amount where Bryan Lee O'Malley, as the writer, is playing with what he's putting visually on the screen, the panel here, the page, and literalizing it and what it is as metaphor, because you have Ramona bleeding out, and Scott's like, are you? And she says, I'll be fine. I shouldn't have let myself get hurt. Which, yes, okay, we're talking about a injury with a sword, but it's also really, I shouldn't have let myself get hurt by opening up my emotions. Like, that's what we're talking about here, is how you invest in somebody and what you open yourself up to. And Ramona saying our whole relationship was like some sick experiment to him. He just has a way of getting inside my head. Again, you have a way of playing with the metaphor of what this is. Like, there are shitty people who just will treat your relationship like a game, like an experiment, and that's what Gideon is.
And they have a hold over you that you just can't. There's nothing you can do about. Like, for whatever reason, like, you know, you are attracted to who you're attracted to, and you love who you love, and like sometimes that's like to your own detriment because you can't help it. Yeah. But in this case, it's more sinister.
Which is one of the reasons why I love this book so much, because when we get into the nitty-gritty of what Gideon's done, how his pervasive grossness has affected these relationships and what it's trying to say in the metaphor sense, I think it's really, really good.
Yeah.
But there is a literal way into Ramona's head, and it's through the bag. So Scott climbs into the bag and he hops in to go face the Gideon inside of her head, who looks like, you know, a real nasty anime boy. He's like, he's so thick and purple. He's the purple man.
Yeah, he looks like the purple man with Vegeta hair.
And that's definitely like knowing the Marvel comic nerd Bryan Lee O'Malley is. It's not accidental that there's some purple man here.
Yeah.
I'm all powerful in her head, man. And you get this wonderful, like, continuous, as Scott is going after him, he's growing in size, holding Ramona in this, like, what he believes is what she really wants, or the sexualized desire state.
He turns into like a giant, like, the only comparison I can think of at this moment is like Toguro from Yu Yu Hakusho, who like triples his size. He's a big boy.
And he's got all his imaginary loves around him in his little spiritual form. And Scott's charging at him in this giant anime villain thing to tell him would you just look at yourself, which is the thing Scott needed to do.
Yeah.
And he headbutts him so hard, which is great. The art here is just like Bryan Lee O'Malley pulling no punches in what he's doing with this final confrontation. I love it. And then you get the part that I love so much, which is Ramona waking up from her own Gideon created desire state and becoming herself, breaking her shackles. Ching. And summoning other versions of herself to say, you know, part of me will always belong to you, but the rest of me, the other parts of me, they're finished with you. And you get all these different Ramona showing up ready to kick Gideon's
all
ass.
the different hair colors she's ever had.
So good.
Yeah.
Really,
also,
really
I just love how she goes from being like the docile girlfriend bit laying down, and then she just instantly gets up, her dress changes, snaps the cuffs.
Hell yeah.
Like, angry eyes.
Yeah, angry eyes, Ramona. And she apparently grows in size by the looks of it. And once she summons all the other Ramonas, I'm like, kick his ass.
Yeah. And so Gideon's ready to get screwed up in the mind space, but back in the real world, he's about to kill Scott, and Ramona intervenes by putting herself and her bag between Scott and the blade. Ching. Which is a beautiful piece of art as the bag is sliced into. And will explode everywhere and leave tons of things. But outside of what's left of the bag, Romano will pull out the power of love. which heals her wounds. And this part of the chapter when the bag explodes is called Chapter 38. Music Sounds Better With You, which I love.
That's also a great song. Real song.
Yeah, I just love that as like the choice of the sentiment here.
Yeah.
And this is also a really good part because Envy's up on stage. She's like, Gideon, hurry up. Because she's like, she wants to get back to performing. She wants to get back to what she's doing.
Yeah.
And you really get to see Gideon's true colors when she's like, hey, are you okay? And he goes, back off. Do you think I need help from you? And then just takes a sword out from behind her. Well, but this is also where Scott realizes that he messed up. Yeah. Like you see the thing with Envy where she tells him to get out of his life, where he breaks up with knives. Kim confronting Scott about moving away. And then when Ramona disappears into subspace. And this is when Scott finally kind of like understands what Gideon is.
Yeah. He even says like, I get you. I understand. Like, you're just like you are like me. I understand you.
And before he says that, he looks over and he sees the faces of all his friends.
And Kim!
In the true anime way. And the spirit of Kim in the background also represented and part of it.
Love it. She's a Force ghost.
So good.
There's also mention of the cat, or Gideon's like, you named your cat Gideon. Ramona's like, I have my own way of working things out.
You were the cat?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I wasn't the cat.
Yeah.
You named your cat after me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that bit. I that had also been a question for a long time in the book, so I really love that the resolution was, what? No, I wasn't the cat.
Yeah. I was waiting for some twist with the cat, but it was just, that's how she works out her trauma. Yeah.
Yeah. So Scott says, I think I understand you, man, which means I have to kill you now.
Yep.
And Scott levels up and earns the power of understanding.
Plus
t-shirt unlocked.
And a new t-shirt unlocks. Oh god, I love the video game references in this
Guts
book
plus 1, heart plus 3, balls plus 2.
Hell yeah.
So that's when Scott gets in. Envy also gets a stats when her dress comes apart as he pulls out the sword. Envy's dress fell off, revealing a sexier dress. Charm increased.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's like, Gideon's all like, I had a sword built into Envy's dress in case of emergency. That's just the kind of guy I am. It's like,
he's one step ahead, always thinking.
And then we finally hit the moment you alluded to earlier, which is Gideon saying, I've been back and forth all year, very convenient, practically empty too inside of Scott's head, except for some dull-ass high school memories. I may have spiced them up a little.
Yeah.
So Gideon's been messing with Scott's head directly, despite Scott already being messed up in the head.
Like, he didn't need
which Ramona calls out. She's like, you sleaze, his brain doesn't need any extra damage from you. Scott, extra.
Yeah, I was like, he's already messed up enough.
Yeah. And that's when they get to their fight with Gideon. They beat him down, and Gideon says, getting rid of me won't save you. You're your own worst enemies, both of you.
True.
Which they look at each other and say, no, I'm pretty sure you're worse, dude. You're definitely worse. And Gideon just looks despondent as they are in agreement about him just being garbage. And
it's almost that almost looks like almost like a Buster sword.
Yeah. You got the big blade in the hands of Scott, and he says, for messing with my head, with Ramona's head, for the League of Evil Ex-Boyfriends, for the good of all mankind. And then they defeat him in that cross-X style, the same way it happens in the movie.
Hell yeah. And then it rains coins. And what I love about this, which didn't happen in the movie, if it rains like $7 million worth of coins, people would be getting hurt. So like there's a panel of people going, getting rained on.
The first is like, oh, like even this bearded guy right here, he's just like, yay, it's raining money. And then when it gets closer, they all go, oh, wait a minute. Ow, 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 ow. It's kind of like when Family Guy did the Scrooge McDuck joke of Peter trying to jump into the money pit. And he's like, it's just a bunch of tiny little masses making up one big mass. Why would anyone do this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we move on to the rest of the story, the epilogue, the conclusion, anything else you guys want to touch on or say about the fight with Gideon?
The Sailor Moon reference is amazing.
The Sailor Moon reference?
Yeah, when he's like the last monologue before they do the cross slash, like in a Chrono Trigger, where he says, I'll punish you. That's what Sailor Moon says when she transforms into Sailor Moon.
There you go. All right. I have a question about, it is not a detractor at all, but like, did you need Gideon to be like, oh, I also messed with both of your brains? Like, because like I think Scott did enough personal damage to himself. I don't think I personally needed Gideon to be an extra layer eviler of like, oh yeah, I've also been this entire years going back and messing with your brain. Like I didn't need that. It just makes him an eviler person. But it's not like a detractor. But like again, it's not a knock, but it's just one I'm like, oh, I didn't really need that personally. But like maybe there's a better reason. And I'm just thinking about
I wouldn't say I would knock it. It just, to me, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it like, yes, Scott had the revelation that he was bad and he was a horrible person, but it also, I would say it just adds to Gideon's evilness.
Yeah, because
I mean, it doesn't really. To me, it's not. It doesn't detract. It doesn't take away from the growth that Scott had earlier. Because when he's fighting the nigga Scott, he's like, yeah, I know I messed him up, but also kind of makes sense. Like when you look back at Volume 2 with Simon Lee with the purple, with like Simon being the purple guy. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that I could see that as Gideon messing with Scott's brain, like making Scott to be like, I am the coolest. I am like this really awesome person who saved Kim. That's what when he says he spices up the memories a little bit. It's like, yeah, of course I spiced them up a little bit. It was all boring, and it was boring as shit in there.
I think what I'll say is that the thing for me, and I don't think it's necessary. I will say that I don't think it's needed.
Yeah.
What I feel like it's there for is to not take responsibility through Gideon for Scott's forgetfulness. I think that's just part of what Scott's been doing, his repression, all of that.
Yeah.
I do think it's meant to explain Scott playing off what little he does tell Ramona about his past. So like the stuff with Simon Lee that he makes bigger.
Yeah.
Right? Like the only person he ever tells that to is Ramona.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time he ever imagines it like that is in his own head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Kim who later is like, dude, what are you talking about? And so like there's an implication almost that like Scott never really told anyone else the Simon Lee story went like that.
Yeah.
But that narrative might have been created by Gideon. And like,
Sure.
and like if it's those kinds of things, those aspects of it where Scott pushes himself into the more heroic mindset, ultimately to make it so that he can't resolve his issues.
Yeah.
And that's what Gideon's doing. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I agree with you that I just don't think it's a necessary line.
Yeah. Like, again, it's not a detractor, but I'm just like, when I initially read it, I was like, okay, does this take away Scott's own personal growth because it was actually somebody else harming him? But like, not really, because he still is a shitty person in his own right.
And he still had to do all the things like him resolving his shit with the nega Scott and all that. That's still on him.
Yeah.
And if anything, I think it's also kind of supposed to say that Gideon's own tool was the attempt to destroy Scott was also the source of his own doom.
Yeah.
Because Scott's head only glows for the first time when he's with Kim and he wants to forget everything. He gets locked inside with his own issues and literally has to face and kill the nega Scott.
Yeah.
And because he does that, Scott finds his own resolution to become a more full version of himself.
True.
And like that is pretty direct in the visuals that is when we see Scott's head glow. We've never seen that before. And if we're being told that is Gideon, then what he tried to set Scott up to, that Scott was supposed to lose, right?
Yeah.
To the nega Scott. And Scott didn't because of how much he loves Ramona and because of Kim's support.
Yeah.
And that got him through, which means Gideon making a space for Scott to have done that actually ends up being his undoing.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I think for that, it's pretty cool.
I'm into that.
Yeah. So Gideon's defeated. And Scott finally gets closure with Envy.
Closure!
As she comes up and gives him a hug. And Scott's so happy. He gets his closure at last. Yay. And Ramona's a little like, still don't love Envy, but okay.
Yeah. Scott has a lovely conversation with Ramona. And he's like, I don't know, maybe we can get somewhere together. Maybe we can get unstuck. We'd have to be careful. It could be a bumpy ride. It can get messy. But maybe it'll be worth it. And like that's Scott not taking the easy route because Len, being in a relationship, like it's not gonna be easy the entire way through. Like it'll be challenging, but that's part of love is like getting through the rough patches with someone who's worth it instead of just taking the easy route where there is never conflict and it's you kind of like you're ghosting through a relationship and nobody should be doing that.
Right.
Speaking of relationships,
so
I was gonna say speaking of relationships, Scott finds out that Steven is with Joseph. And he freaks out, like in a good way. He's like, oh! And Joseph's like, I hate your friends.
Some important notes I want to touch on before we get to those ending notes with Scott and Ramona. Yeah. Envy, it does a song, and as she's doing the song, they free Gideon's trapped women.
They become like the backup
which is
dancers.
Great. Also, everyone wants to know where Ramona was. And Ramona says, dudes, I just went to my dudes, I just went to my dad's. He lives in the middle of nowhere. I thought I'd get my head together and come back in a week or two, like a wilderness sabbatical, which Wallace is like, you see, Scott, wilderness sabbatical.
You did it too.
She did the same thing. And she says, yeah, but it didn't really work that way. I just ended up sleeping all day, dicking around on the internet and watching every episode of the X-Files. I mean, I tried calling you, Scott.
Aww.
And that's when everyone is sitting there like, oh my God, they maybe might meant to be.
Yeah, they're perfect.
they both handled it just as sloppily.
Yeah.
Which I really love because again, it draws that direct parallel of like they're kind of the same screw ups.
Yeah.
And yeah, what you mentioned, like I really like the page where it's Ramona saying they're in the elevator, it's her and Scott, and she says, I like nothing can change me as long as I'm the one who's changing first. I feel like I'm in this river just getting swept along. If I hold on to anyone, if I'm holding on for dear life, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm stuck. I never wanted to get stuck. And you got the imagery of all her past iterations that she feels have been trapped. And that's Scott and Ramona saying like, hey, we're going to try and just hold on. She's like, I haven't been very good at that. And Scott repeats the Wallace bit like, hey, it just takes practice.
Yeah. And she smiles. It's so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the moment in the elevator between the two of them. It's very, very, very sweet.
Yeah, I love it.
It is.
That leads to Stephen and Joseph kissing, and Scott is too happy about it. Loves it so much. God, I hate your friends.
It's so good.
It's like Julie turned you gay.
Yeah, right.
Julie turned you gay, which Scott is so happy about. I also really like freaking out a lot. I'm freaking out a little. I'm freaking out a little. He's freaking out a lot. I really like that. Kim and Scott try and play some band music together, and neither Knives or Neil really like it, which means that as Kim says, bad news, Scott, the only two people who could ever have been our fans have developed taste.
Wait, is it just them or is someone else with them too?
No, it's just Kim and Scott.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, they're just playing their own thing.
Yeah.
Which I really like.
And that's cool because like obviously Neil was their friend already, but like Knives being there shows growth for everyone. Like that Scott's okay with just hanging out with Knives and not being weird about it. Like she is part of the friend group now because her and Steven have been friends for a long time. Yeah.
And we get to Knives' emotional goodbye to Scott as she's heading off to college, and Scott says, because he's a better person now, just like, hey, give me a call when you're in town, okay? And she's like, Scott, this is my favorite line, maybe in the whole book. You'll always be my Clash at Demon Head.
Oh, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
Oh, it's adorable.
Which I love because what is she going for? She's kind of going for like, you'll always be my envy, which is like
awful,
but also one of the most important relationships in her life.
Yeah.
So it's a really good one. I just really like it. You'll always be my Clash at Demon Head.
Yeah, I'm sure Scott's like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
What?
I'm really glad that there's like so much good closure on all of these characters. We get all the wrap ups we need, and importantly, we finally get to like Scott and Ramona meeting up where they had their first date on those steps. So we try again, and Han reaches out. All the art here is beautiful. What Bryan Lee O'Malley's doing, it's the perfect serene ending to what he's been telling.
We try again.
As Ramona holds out in the light, and they go into the door. And it's one of my favorite like little pages. Again, I always like when they're dropping in subspace, but this is a really pretty one of them holding hands as they jump into the abyss.
And I love that the ending. It's just them.
Just this little like
them falling, and it ends on like a blank page after that. It's beautiful stuff.
And that's the story of Scott Pilgrim.
Wow, we did it. We read a whole ass book.
So. Now with all that being said, how do we feel about this series? How do we feel about the story? How do we feel about this ending for Scott and Ramona?
I love it. Again, like I would have been happy because I think this book is well written. Like if whoever Scott ended up with, in whatever reason, it would have been justified. But like the book starts with like, yo, I like this girl. I'm gonna fight for this girl, and I'm glad that he didn't take the easy way out, and he did it all the way through. And by doing that, he also became a better person to himself and through making better choices with all his friends. And there's growth throughout this entire book for so many characters, whether they're good people or bad people. But humans are humans and they make mistakes. It's about getting over the mistakes and learning from them instead of just repeating them. And that's really, really cool to have a book like this that again, like looks one way, but it's so much deeper than what I think a lot of people give it credit for. And if they've only seen the movie, I love that movie, like for real, one of my favorite movies. But like there is some missing depth in that movie, and you just get so much of it in this book. Like I read a lot of comics, but like this type of journey for a character, like especially over a long period of time, doesn't really happen emotionally. Usually, it's a lot more like physical things to get over. Like I have to beat someone up or I have to get revenge. Like this type of emotional growth isn't really what you see in a lot of comics. Like opposed to something maybe like a great arc of Spider-Man every once in a while. You know what I mean? It's really special. It's a really cool book, and I see why people love it. I'm glad it's so successful. We've had 2 different adaptations at this point from it, so it's like
and a game.
That's true.
Which is also cool. Like even if we play the game at some point, we're not going to play it enough to do this. But if you play the game, whoever you play as, you get a different ending, and the only one that gets the true ending, which I think is really interesting, is Ramona.
Oh, that's
Ramona
cool.
gives you the true ending from the books.
I love that.
But everybody else gives you a different one.
That's awesome.
Which I think is really cool. I love these books. The ending is what cements it for me as like it's a comic, but like it goes up with like the kind of young adult fiction I really love. That's like about like a big emotional turning point in your youth. Paper Towns is one recent one I think of that's like one of my favorites, or Perks of Being a Wallflower is another. Scott Pilgrim really falls into that same kind of category. It was very, for me, when I first read it, as it remains me revisiting it, it reminds me a lot of my youth. It reminded me a lot of things I was experiencing in my youth when I was reading it the first time.
Even things that like, I was a shitty 20-year-old once. Like I definitely, I'm not gonna say you guys did, but like everyone in their young youth makes mistakes. And the point of growing up is learning from them and being a better person through it. And like nobody expects a 21-year-old to be like the best person in the world. So like you just have to get through it and become a better person from it. And real quick, like again, like I said it's at the beginning, but like Scott Pilgrim is not your average protagonist. He sucks. He sucks for so much of this book. And I don't know many books that would try this hard to have a character this shitty for years at a time. You know what I mean? It's really cool that like he's like, I have a cool perspective that I want to tell about like being young and growing up. It's really great.
Yeah. To your point, I think it's really helpful that Bryan Lee O'Malley's very good at striking a balance of like never letting you feel like Scott isn't that shitty.
Yeah.
But also allowing you to be able to laugh with or at him at times. Yeah. So that you're never too opposed to Scott.
Yeah, he's never like the actual bad guy. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, he is, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He's not a Gideon.
No, he's definitely not Gideon. I mean, I've said I love this book before, and I'll still say that I love this book now. Now that I'm reading it, and now that I'm a lot older, because when I first read it, I was in my early 20s. I wasn't catching much of the subplot or the subtext or anything like that. Now that I realize, like, this is a really good book, not just about relationships and growing as a person, but also transitioning from one stage of your life to the next.
Yeah.
And also what could happen when you're like stuck in your own world, like with like in this volume, the very beginning, Scott, yes, he has his own apartment now, but he's just on his couch playing video games all day, just dicking around. Whereas Steven is doing a new band. Knives is about to graduate and go to college. Everyone else is like moving up in the world. They're like advancing their own lives, but Scott is the only one who's still stuck.
Right.
And that could be, and even if we look back at other volumes, you could see that Scott is still like, he just wants to, keep things the way they are, no matter as much as he wants, but things have to change. Like when he finally gets a job and he's like, yeah, I have a job now. Woohoo. But still he
coasts. He tries to coast.
Yeah, he coasts.
He
coasts. Yeah. He doesn't force himself to move forward until the very end. And I even like for me, because there are times where I'll look back on my own life, that's like there are things where I think like, was I just coasting, or was I just, I have those own doubts about myself. Yeah. It's like, how am I going to move forward?
Right. One of the things for me, and it remains like, we've talked about the movie, we've talked about the movie in comparison to the books, all that kind of stuff. The movie always is a little hard for me right at the end, only because like I constantly hold it to the standard of this book.
Yeah.
And it's because for me, like it's the ending fight with Gideon and putting Knives front and center for it really feels like it's driving towards that ending that they deleted and they should have, but it still feels like it's trying to go for it anyway, because like they didn't change that part of it.
Yeah.
And what I like about the ending of the book here is Ramona has her own agency against Gideon. Like this is just as much Gideon did shitty things to Scott, Gideon also did shitty things to Ramona. And in the book, it's very clear that it's also Ramona's journey, and it's Ramona's decisions to grow and face him. And in the movie, it's much more Gideon did wrong to Scott, and so Scott's lesson is, I'm going to fight you for me.
Revenge.
I'm going to fight you for me and what you put me through. But it's not really about Ramona taking her agency back from Gideon. They literally like reduce it down to like a mind control chip on the back of her head, rather than doing the whole like, yes, he's been warping her mind, but like what that means for her emotionally. And like that always trips up the movie a little bit for me when you have the knowledge of what this book has about Ramona. And I think her story is just as good as Scott's here. I think that she's such a good character. I half the reason I like this book so much is not just because it's a good resolution to like Scott finally getting his shit together and being this better version of himself, but it also says like, here's Ramona, and Ramona was making mistakes too, and Ramona's also on a similar journey and has to find her own path and has to stand up to her own demons and the same kind of thing. And their demon just happens to be the same person right now, which is Gideon. But like all the moments that Bryan Lee O'Malley gives her of like her triumphantly and heroically jumping out of Scott's chest, saving Scott's life with the bag, fighting for him with the sword first before he pulls the sword out. Like those are all really important, like female first choices that you don't get a lot in these narratives. You don't get a lot in these comics, especially in a story where it starts off as like, I need to fight all these guys to be with you. Which puts the girl so far behind it. It's just cool that at the time, Bryan Lee O'Malley was already pushing for Ramona to be a character within herself, a character who had to overcome her own, like she's flawed, and she has to overcome her own challenges that are very much the same as Scott's and grow, and that she's allowed the full amount of this volume to show that as well. Is really valuable and not something I think you see, especially at this time in the space as much, especially in the genre of storytelling we're doing.
And like you said, or like just a couple minutes ago, Ben, like every single character grows and gets resolution in some capacities, big or small. Like Stephen Stills, who was a side character that's really fun, but like even he has growth through this book. And Kim with her issues with Scott gets resolved. Even Julie, I wouldn't say gets resolved, but like she does her own thing and moves away.
Wallace becomes monogamous.
Him and Mobile, God bless him, his psychic boyfriend, who we don't get to see too much, but that's really fun. Like everybody gets to grow and like learn.
That's why they clarify, like it's in the small blurb, but when he's at the club with other Scott, who he had been sleeping with earlier,
best friend.
It says best friend, not boyfriend or any of that. He's not playing those games because Wallace becomes monogamous, and like that's background stuff, but it's there.
Everybody gets to grow in some capacity in this book, and it's lovely to see.
Speaking just about the books at large, I think Bryan Lee O'Malley is so good at doing a lot with a little. This is both in what his visualizations, like we've talked about it before, his art is so good that sometimes he hits you with something that you feel emotionally. And he does it very simply and very directly and clear, where like just what he shows you on the page makes you feel an emotion about these characters and about being young. And
it's simple and clean.
What the moment is. And it's also about how he writes things. Like there's not too much attention given to envy in this book. Like, but there's just the right amount there to give you the full impact of envy having her own perspective and like fighting against that narrative of what Scott has created about who she is. And without diverting a ton of time in the whole chapter to envy, you still get that. And Bryan Lee O'Malley is very succinct and very good at writing those lines that give you just the right amount of words and just enough to understand the story.
Absolutely.
And that's been true throughout the whole series, I think.
I'm very glad we got to do this. This has been a wonderful journey of Scott Pilgrim in all mediums. The last couple of weeks. So good.
I'm really glad that you finally got to go through it. I'm glad we got to share it. I know this has been a series Ben and I have been big fans of for a while. Having the show come out as an excuse to express it. I think you can, having read the books and now with the show as well, like to me, the show is very much a companion piece to this.
Yes.
even more so than an adaptation.
Even though it's aping from the movie adaptation,
Yeah.
it feels more in line with like the book.
But because Bryan Lee O'Malley comes back, like it does feel like Bryan, and I've read some of the stuff since watching the show of him talking about wanting to kind of give something to the characters that he couldn't serve in the books. And like a lot of that is, without going too spoilery into the show, like giving the X's their due as characters is something he really wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Having watched that show now and like thinking in perspective, like that adds a lot more to all of those characters, all the characters who, you're right, like they are like the antagonists of the book, but they're also people who have flaws that they probably want to get over. And like, again, I don't want to spoil the show, but like there's a lot of good resolution in that show for people that like I didn't think we would ever get it for, which is great.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. At some point, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah.
This was wonderful. I'm really glad we did it. I'm really glad that Ryan had such new, fresh eyes for it. I think that was a ton of fun.
Just like Scott Pilgrim, my memory's awful. And I thought I read some of these books when I didn't. So I'm glad to be here and I'm grown as a person.
Maybe one day we'll get to sit down together and actually play that game. I would love to, even if it's not for any particular purposes other than let's do it for fun, even if it's not tying into the release of anything.
It's a great game.
We tried playing it online, didn't work.
Yeah,
that show is out. It might have a second season. It's really up in the air.
Oh, is that even being like considered?
They said that they made no plans for one. If it did well enough, they would consider coming back and telling a story, but they weren't intending to.
That definitely, it feels like a one-off show to me, but like I get why
you got your little like
cliffhanger
moment.
Yeah.
So like there can be, but they said like they in no way feel obligated to do one.
Yeah, I feel that.
So we'll see. But either way, we're hoping to talk about what's out of that show soon. Can't guarantee how soon because I become a father at the time of this recording.
Hours potentially
within days.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It might happen soon, and it might be a little ways away. The other thing you can look for is Monarch. We will do that finale. That also will be sometime later than when the show actually ends. We will come back around on it because, again, baby. Other than that, keep an eye out for some basement arcades. Basement arcade pause menus hopefully coming in the near future. You two got a quarterly to do.
Yeah, maybe. I didn't play a lot of new games this quarter.
Well, sure. I think you played more than you think you did.
No, I still played Baldur's Gate.
Played Wonder. You can talk about Wonder.
I don't have a lot to say about that game.
That's fair. We'll see. There'll be that. Obviously, like our last episode of the Fake Nerd podcast and our latest episode, but our final episode for the foreseeable future is currently up. You can check it out on the YouTube channel and wherever you listen to that podcast on its feeds. Please stay subscribed. All the rest of the shows are still continuing at some point. They're just probably slowing down quite a bit. But there's a lot of things that we're still talking about that we still want to get to. More importantly than anything, just stay subscribed to the socials. Keep checking back on things. Stay subscribed here. Like and subscribe on this channel. Check out fakenerdpodcast.com. That's still accessible to you for now. And for that, I'll turn it to you, Ben. Where can people find you?
Well, they could find me counting in sex bomb at benmagnet27 on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Threads. I had a brain fart there for a second. You can also find me writing for Old School Gamer Magazine, Fusion Gaming Magazine, GoNintendo.com, and playing Mary Frankenstein in D and Dark.
Ryan?
You can find me taken off, just like Scott Pilgrim, at DJ Tony Snark all over the internet.
And you can find me continuing to hold on at Sparkz on Instagram and Twitter, SPARKZ Witty.
Woo!
All right, that'll do it for now. We're not entirely sure when we'll be back with a Fake Nerd Book Club. Expect to see some more archives release over the next few months. And at some point, we'll try and come back together on Fake Nerd Book Club. We'll let you know when that's happening, but it's going to be a little bit. So consider the show going on a hiatus for now. And until then, stay fake nerds.